How influential were women and freedmen during the reign of the Julio Claudian emperors? Well, we're going to have a quick look at that right now. As ever, this comes with a warning. This is a revision clip, so everything has been summarized. There is, of course, additional material and references that you might want to make in an actual answer. And similarly, we're going to go through this chronologically because it's a revision clip. You could quite easily answer your question thematically. We're going to work on the assumption that a question is likely to focus on the influence of women and freedmen, and you could certainly argue that this influence gradually extends throughout the module and gets bigger. However, even in Augustus' material, you can see that women are actually pretty influential, in particular his wife Livia. And you might also want to speculate, is that really a massive change? Because even in Republic material that we've got, you can actually see women being quite influential behind the scenes. For example, Brutus's mum, Servilia, in some Cicero letters, seems a pretty influential figure. Anyway, back to Julio Claudians. What would a possible answer look like? Well, you could focus and look at Augustus in his relationship with his daughter and his wife Livia. For Tiberius, you probably want to focus again on Livia because Livia, remember, is Augustus's wife, but also Tiberius's mum. You would probably want to talk about Agrippina the Elder and Livilla as well, who's going to be quite important in terms of her relationship with Sejanus. Gaius, you'd be focusing on his sisters. Claudius, where a big chunk of your answer is going to focus, would have to look at his use of freedmen and the influence of those freedmen, but also the notorious or supposedly notorious wives, number 3 and number 4, which would be Messalina and Agrippina the Younger. And for Nero, Agrippina the Younger is also going to need to feature because Agrippina the Younger is, of course, Nero's mum. So let's look to start off with Augustus. So who was Augustus married to? Of course, we're going to be focusing on Livia, but don't forget Augustus had been married before Livia. How many children does he have? He has a natural daughter, Julia, and he has 2 stepchildren, which would be Tiberius and his brother Drusus. Grandson-wise, he's actually got 3. He's got Gaius and Lucius Caesar, but of course he's also got a posthumous, and you might know that that's not going to be a happy ending pretty much for all 3 grandsons, really. Here's the family tree. Now, again, because this is a revision clip, this family tree has been summarized, and absolutely you could add way more detail onto here, and I've just tried to make it as easy as possible from a revision point of view. Here's Augustus and his daughter Julia. Do you remember that Julia's mum was actually Scribonia, who was divorced before Augustus married Livia? And of course, when Augustus married Livia, it's quite scandalous because she already had Tiberius and was pregnant with Drusus. So that's going to be important to be aware of. Augustus and his daughter Julia have a really interesting relationship. We'll discuss that very shortly. Julia is married multiple times. So the first marriage is to Marcellus, and they're of course cousins. And Marcellus dies early. Julia is then married a second time to Agrippa, and Julia and Agrippa actually have 5 Gaius and Lucius Caesar, Agrippa Posthumus, Julia, and Agrippina the Elder. And then when Agrippa died early, Julia was then married to Tiberius, and Tiberius is not very happy because he was happily married before and has to divorce her and has to marry Julia. And by all accounts and in all sources, the Julia-Tiberius relationship is not a very good one. So let's have a quick look at Augustus's relationship with his daughter Julia. Now, we get a big chunk of our material from Suetonius, and in this regard, Suetonius is probably pretty reliable. Remember, he writes much later, director of the Imperial Archives, but the crucial thing is he does have access to Augustus's letters and papers, and he regularly uses these and cites them in his biography. In Suetonius, he discusses Julia's marriages, and also in verse 64 about the children with Agrippa. But it's also in this verse, in verse 64, that we get a little bit of a discussion about the atmosphere and environment that Julia and her 2 daughters are kept in. And it does seem pretty strictly controlled, especially in regard to friendships. Now, in verse 65, we get a little reference to some of the scandalous behavior. And again, Suetonius is probably likely quite reliable. Yes, we know he likes his racy gossip, but there's no real need to over-egg this. So in terms of the scandalous behavior, of course, Julia the elder and Julia the younger were both accused of indulging in every sort of vice, banished, and then Augustus is incredibly upset when he hears about their adulteries. There's a really dodgy little anecdote when we hear that one of Julia's friends, Phoebe, has committed suicide, and Augustus actually wishes that he was Phoebe's father rather than Julia's, which is uh, Jeremy Kyle worthy. The terms of their exiles are sent to islands and deprived of alcohol, wine, and male slaves. And Julia the youngest child is actually exposed. He refers to the two Julias and Agrippa Posthumus as my three running sores. So clearly, not a particularly great relationship. Let's briefly discuss Livia. Livia, Augustus's wife, is a huge influence, according to Suetonius and Tacitus. So much so that it's Livia that persuades Augustus to adopt Tiberius, and Tacitus even goes as far as to allege she had a secret hand in the deaths of Gaius and Lucius, which is really interesting allegation, but doesn't seem to be much evidence. It's Tacitus that says that Augustus was so influenced by Livia that it's actually Livia that persuades Augustus to exile his only grandson. And then, when Augustus is dead, it's supposedly a Tiberius-Livia combo that results in Agrippa Posthumus's execution. Dotted throughout Suetonius' coverage of Augustus, you do get Augustus and Livia discussing key issues over letters, and a great example would be the real concern about Claudius, the future Emperor Claudius's public appearances. So you got Suetonius again citing actual letters, and supposedly. She is actually adopted as Augustus's daughter in his will, and we know that she's given the title of the Augusta as well. There's two great Tacitus quotes that sort of summarize Livia, but do remember, of course, that from a point of view of a Tacitus or a Suetonius, the idea of a woman having so much influence over an emperor is a pretty negative thing. So they're bound to resent that influence. So Tacitus, check out this. And finally, there was Livia, an oppressive mother to the state and an oppressive stepmother to the house of the Caesars. And equally, when she's proposed to be given the title of mother of the country, Tiberius actually cuts this short and says that honours for women should be strictly curtailed. Interestingly, the Suetonius and the Tacitus accounts are corroborated by Pliny. Chronologically, of course, Tacitus and Pliny are much more closer, well, a little bit closer than to events than Suetonius is, but Pliny does mention the adulteries and says about all the misfortunes for Augustus is that he actually dies with his enemy's own son nominated as heir and Agrippa Posthumus exiled due to the scheming of Tiberius and Livia. So Pliny pretty much corroborates what Suetonius and Tacitus are telling us about the influence of Livia. Let's look at Tiberius. We're going to start off with a funky little piece of artwork, which I absolutely, totally love. What's going on here? This is Agrippina the Elder returning with the ashes of Germanicus. So Germanicus had been sent to the east by Tiberius, where he was supposedly poisoned by the governor of Syria, Piso. And this is his widow and his children returning to Rome, and scenes of mourning as Agrippina brings Germanicus's ashes back to the city. Now, Agrippina strongly suspected Tiberius of complicity / ordering Piso to poison and murder her husband. And that's why we get some type of factional dispute between Agrippina the Elder and Tiberius. And Suetonius also gives us some great information here. He talks about Tiberius testing Agrippina's loyalty when he offers her an apple. She refuses because she thinks it's poison, and Tiberius uses that as a great example of her disloyalty. And Agrippina is eventually exiled, where she's flogged so badly that she loses an eye. She eventually starves herself to death, and then Tiberius slanders her memory. And do be aware, of course, that Agrippina's sons, with the exception of Gaius, future emperor, are also murdered / commit suicide as well. So this is quite interesting, because is Agrippina and this faction, is Tiberius treating them because they're a threat to him and his grandson becoming the next emperor? Also, is it Sejanus's influence that results in this cruel treatment? Let's focus on Tiberius's daughter-in-law, which is Livilla. And this is a great example of women being used as an opportunity, or opportunism here, by ambitious men. And certainly this is what Sejanus, who according to Tacitus seduces Livilla. They're both in on poisoning Tiberius's son Drusus, and then Sejanus attempts to marry Livilla in a letter to Tiberius, saying, "I've never asked for brilliant office. Please, can I have some protection from the malevolence of Agrippina?" And Tiberius sort of replies in a kind of no kind of way. So he basically says that Agrippina and her opposition would be intensified, and basically said, he says, "What you and Livilla decide, I shall not oppose." In brackets, no, you're going a little bit too far here, buddy. So Livilla and Sejanus and his relationship with her certainly are a great example about how women could be used as an opportunity. And then, of course, Tiberius's mother, Livia, dies during his reign as well. And Tacitus gives us some pretty negative stuff, discusses her plain funeral, the fact that a will is not respected, a eulogy is delivered by Gaius. Tiberius does not attend because supposedly he's really, 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 really busy. He stops any divine honors being voted to her. Remember, of course, Claudius later on will do just that. And importantly for Tacitus, he says that Livia's death actually removed that final restraining influence on Tiberius, and that's why he can then sort of resort to all of the cruelty and depravity that his stay on Capri entails. So Livia, even in death, is pretty influential on her son Tiberius. So Gaius, are women influential? Well, yeah, but also no. So it's really interesting. Obviously, I mean, how would things panned out if Gaius is actually princeps for a little bit longer? Here's a coin which is absolutely completely remarkable. Because it portrays Gaius's sisters, Agrippina the younger, Drusilla and Livilla here, as goddesses. So actually being portrayed whilst they're still alive on a coin is really, 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 really remarkable. In Suetonius, obviously Suetonius is focusing on the madness of Gaius. And his cruelty and his depravity. But there's some really, really interesting stuff. In particular, in verse 24, with Drusilla, you get the discussion of the incest. In regard to his own wife, Caesonia, you've got some pretty dodgy stuff in verse 25. There's that little quote in verse 33. The important thing with looking at that Suetonius, though, is, is it gossip? Where's the evidence of this incest? Equally, if there is rumors of the incest, is that a deliberate attempt by Gaius to really ramp up and reinforce and reiterate the divinity card, because he is aware that he has opposition in the Senate and he can't really compete with senators in any other form of status? So this incest rumor is really, really quite interesting. But of course, again, where's Suetonius's proof for this? Is it really just sort of sensationalized court gossip? So this is really quite an interesting and intriguing issue. Let's have a look at Claudius. Now, this is where a big focus of an answer would need to be. For Claudius, you could discuss, obviously, the freedmen and why Claudius is so needing this group of freedmen. Freedmen are incredibly useful to Claudius, and certainly is that a reaction to the Senate and the Senate's inability to get stuff done, as you can see in various events in Tiberius's reign. I picked out 4 here. Of course, there's many more, but it's really interesting again about why Claudius would need to use these guys. If he uses senators in his new civil service, then that kind of destroys the whole image of the princeps and primus inter pares and that type of idea. Plus, these guys have got specialisms as well, and as discussed earlier with Tiberius's reign, we've seen that the Senate are pretty useless in getting a lot of stuff done. The important thing, of course, is that Suetonius and Tacitus would absolutely massively resent the idea of freedmen having such influence on the emperor. They go as far as to describe them merely as ex-slaves in Tacitus's case, and Suetonius says that Claudius fell so deeply under the influence of these freedmen and wives that he seemed to be their servant rather than emperor. So what about Claudius's wives? Well, he's got 4. The first 2 obviously important, in particular for various reasons, but in particular number 2 for the daughter that Claudius has, but it's number 3 and number 4, Messalina and Agrippina, that are really, really, really important. With Messalina, he has Octavia and also Britannicus, and Messalina is going to get executed. The reason why is that bigamous relationship that she supposedly embarks on. Messalina is executed, and instead we get Agrippina being married by Claudius instead, which is really quite dodgy, as we'll see. So in terms of children, it's going to be really important because Messalina and Claudius' son Britannicus, and Agrippina, her son, and Claudius's adopted son Nero. Britannicus and Nero is a potential dispute as to who's going to become emperor after Claudius. Messalina is a really interesting figure. In Tacitus, we get lots of racy material about what Messalina is like, what dodgy activities she gets up to. But the important thing, again, is that have these notorious sexual appetites been exaggerated? Plus, of course, Messalina is younger than Claudius. Claudius is potentially not the most lovable of husbands, but is it also reflecting court gossip? So Tacitus really does focus on this. We also get some chunk of information in Suetonius, verse 36. It's Suetonius 29 that really tells us about how influential these freedmen and wives are. Because in this verse, we get a little bit of discussion about what Claudius actually does, supposedly under the influence of these freedmen and wives, whether it is giving out army commands or punishments, or whether it's revoking stuff, cancelling edicts, or simply just executing 35 senators or 300 equites. This is all done under the influence of the wives and the freedmen. Now, Messalina is executed after the supposed bigamous relationship marriage that she has, and Claudius marries wife number 4, which is Agrippina. But of course, how was Claudius related to Agrippina? Well, it's a little bit dodgy, isn't it, really? Because remember, if we look at our simplified family tree, here's Claudius's brother Germanicus. Oh, that's a little bit dodgy, isn't it? Over here, not Gaius, Agrippina. Claudius marries his niece. So that is definitely incestuous. So how can Claudius get away with this? Well, we get, again, all of this discussion in the Tacitus coverage of this. It's the influence of his freedman Pallas, that means that Claudius marries Agrippina, and he sort of says, well, pros, she's really, really young, she's really, really fertile, but cons, you're related to her. Be aware, Tacitus does write from a senatorial point of view, and again, he would resent the influence that Agrippina clearly wields. So yeah, it's Pallas that actually says, well, good news, she's a Julian, she's still young. It's bad news that she's actually kind of related to you. And then supposedly Agrippina seduces Claudius. But how can we actually get away with such a clearly incestuous marriage? Well, this is why it's really handy to have supporters in the Senate. And there is a wonderful speech, wonderful because it's hilarious, speech given by Vitellius in the Senate, where basically he says the Senate and the people of Rome actually present the emperor with a wife ... that happens to be your niece, and because Claudius is ordered to do this, he's like, oh dearie me. So Vitellius' speech in Tacitus is actually really worth rereading just for comedy effect, really. Tacitus clearly thinks it's negative because it's a complete obedience to a woman. And then Pallas, again, the freedman, who by this point is Agrippina's lover, is also sort of saying, hey, well, Britannicus needs a protector. So why don't, not only obviously you married her, but why don't you adopt her son Nero as your son? What a great idea. And the Senate approve. Agrippina's named Augusta, and then she starts establishing colonies. One of the best examples that you can see about the influence that Agrippina clearly has is when Caractacus, the British rebel, is brought to Rome, and he pays the same level of homage to Agrippina as he does with Claudius. So that's really quite interesting. Britannicus, by this point, is being distinctly sidelined. His officers, guards, his teachers, his slaves are banished or executed, and he's put under control of one's loyal to Agrippina. So clearly Agrippina is trying to out-muscle and shoulder out Britannicus so Nero, her son, can become emperor next. And it's only a matter of time before Agrippina starts thinking, oh, how can we get rid of Claudius? If only there was a poisoner in Rome and some mushrooms that we could use. So yeah, really quite interesting because of the influence that clearly Pallas and Agrippina and others before them clearly had on Claudius. Tacitus is so negative about it that he says this, that with an emperor whose likes and dislikes were all dictated to him, anything seemed possible. Let's focus on Nero and continue looking at Agrippina, because Agrippina, Nero's mum, is so influential that she actually, again, in another remarkable coin, is actually featured on a coin with Nero, and they're both looking at each other. They're almost as equals. So we've got Nero over here. We've got Agrippina with her Augusta title, wife of the divine Claudius, who's obviously been deified by Nero. And yeah, the important thing is here, are they actually being presented as co-rulers? Now, in the Tacitus coverage, things are going to get negative reasonably quickly. We've got the supposed 5 golden years when Nero reigns under the influence of Seneca and Borus. But the relationship with his mum is going to deteriorate pretty rapidly, hence this awesome picture, which is the collapsible boat idea, which is kind of awesome because it's just so crazy. And in Tacitus, yeah, what starts all this? Well, actually, the key thing that starts all this is that Agrippina starts losing influence over her teenage emperor son. Who'd have known that teenagers can be a little bit rebellious? And Nero is having a relationship with a lady called Opte. Agrippina gets into feminine rage about it, and Nero's openly disobedient. Agrippina then tries to use Britannicus and starts to sort of promote his influence rather than Nero, to the extent that, according to Tacitus, she actually attempts to use incest. No sexual novelty seemed incredible to such a woman, but we've got to be cautious, though, because again, the proof is pretty flimsy. Nero's new lover, Poppaea, is the one that sort of chips in that actually Nero needs to divorce rather Claudius's daughter Octavia, and it's a guy called Anicetus who comes up with the idea that thinks, actually, well, if we need to kill your mum because you're never going to divorce Claudius's daughter while she's still alive, let's come up with the shipwreck idea, and of course you've got the sort of wonderful, sort of horrible histories style murder attempts by Nero with the collapsible boat, and then obviously finally Agrippina then murdered. The important thing is what Nero uses in terms of his justification. He says that Agrippina wanted to be a co-ruler, and that she's responsible for all of Claudius's scandals. And the important thing for Senate and Julio Claudian emperor question is the opposition of Thrasea. We're not going to go into detail here, but that does indicate the increasingly negative relationship between Nero and the Senate. Now, a lot of this material is actually corroborated again by other writers. So, Suetonius, but also Dio and Josephus. So, what does Suetonius say about the murder of Agrippina the Younger in verse 34? Well, again, he's the guy that talks about how she is stripped of her guards. He attempts to poison her. There's a collapsible bed. What is it with Nero and collapsing things? Beds, boats. Just maybe creativity is lacking a little bit. And then supposedly there is also the regret that Nero has of the murder of his mum. Who'd have thought that? That's shocking. He also kills his wife. Auntie. That's weird. Auntie Domitia. And that kills her via a laxative. What did Dio and Josephus say? Well, Dio is pretty much corroborating all of that information as well, as we'll see in a second. Wives-wise, with Nero, we've got Octavia, obviously, first of all. And Acte has that relationship with her, the freedwoman. Poppaea Sabina is really, really quite interesting. In Tacitus, she's a hugely negative influence, and she is murdered, according to our sources, whilst pregnant, for criticizing Nero from returning from the races late. Tacitus certainly says that she's responsible for the removals of Octavia and Agrippina. Once Poppaea is murdered, we've then got other relationships that Nero has, particularly with Sporus as well. And finally, he's married a third time to Statilia Messalina, the great granddaughter of one of Augustus's generals. But of course, Suetonius has the caveat that Nero had to murder her husband first. So these women are influential in different ways. Poppaea Sabina is particularly an influential one up until she's murdered by Nero. Dio says that Agrippina is so influential, she claims that she made Nero emperor, which is kind of backing up what Suetonius and Tacitus say. And Josephus is similarly saying the same thing. Nero murdered his stepbrother Britannicus, his own mother, and his wife. So, how to conclude this? How influential are our Julio Claudians? Well, our women during the reign of our Julio Claudians? Well, they're influential in varying degrees throughout all of the reigns of the Julio Claudian emperors. But it's particularly difficult to evaluate this because of our sources. And our sources kind of depict the women in a positive or a negative light, with very little in between. There's a great book by Emma Southern that's called Agrippina, and she pretty much comes up with a great conclusion that we can kind of use here, because our awareness of these women, and even the freedmen, but in particularly of the women, is limited by our sources. So they're either represented as paragons of virtue or personifications of evil, and there's very little in between.